to another episode of the Adoption Happy Hour brought to you by Indiana Adoptee Network. We are so glad that all of you have decided to spend your Friday night with us. I'm your host, Marcie Keithley, along with Pam Krosky and Jennifer Falsing in the Zoom room. So they'll be helping us out with fielding some questions. But before I introduce this week's spotlight guest, I want to take a moment, if you haven't already, once again, welcome you to the chat bar and drop in and say hello in the state or country that you're calling from. And if this is your first time, we want to give you a big warm welcome and hope you'll come back and see us. We are here every Friday night at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And we have a variety of guests, anywhere from adoptees, first families, adoptive parents, authors, filmmakers, you name it, we've got it. So we hope you'll come back. But before we dig in, we do like to do a couple of little housekeeping items, and especially for those of you that don't know who we are. Give us just a second here. We are Indiana Adoptee Network based out of Indianapolis. We've been in existence for about 4 years. We host an annual conference in Indianapolis each year. Our conference right now is scheduled for May of 2021. It appears that will probably end up being a summit, a virtual summit, but we have been holding a conference every year. We like to partner with other nonprofits to advance adoptee rights, causes, and education. We do have a newsletter. If you'd like a copy, we'd be happy to share one with you. We also talk about we recommend books, plays, and films. We assist with search, first contact, and DNA. And we are all available for speaking engagements. So that's just a little bit about us. And then we do have a disclosure that we like to share.
So we'd like to have everybody remain on mute. You can unlock your microphone during the Q&A. You can raise your hand virtually on the screen or by posting in the chat. This is a public meeting with no guarantee that information or identity is confidential. The presentation portion of this event is recorded and shared on our YouTube channel. We do not record the Q&A actually. So let me rephrase that. Tonight, we're actually going to record this entire session. So it will be a little different tonight. We're recording from beginning to end. So if you want to ask a question and you don't want to be recognized, you can go ahead and put it in the chat and we can ask it for you. Or you can ask it yourself, whichever one you feel comfortable with. If you're experiencing a serious mental health event or suicidal thoughts, please contact a licensed professional or the suicide hotline, and it's now covered up by the chat, 1-800-273-8255.
Thanks, Pam.
Right. You're welcome.
And I appreciate you mentioning that about the recording. So we will be fully recording tonight. And also what we'll be doing a little bit differently is, instead of doing a regular presentation, we want it to be more interactive with all of you and give you time to answer all of your questions. So we're going to start off with doing that. And at this time, it's my honor and privilege to introduce Ann Fessler. Welcome, Ann.
Thank you very much, and thanks for everyone who's joining in.
I'm so happy to have you.
Thank you.
I'd like to start off by sharing a little bit about you for our viewers. For those of you that don't know Ann, Ann Fessler's audio and video installations, artists, books, photographs, and films have been showed widely in galleries and museums, film festivals since the early 80s. In 2003, she was awarded a Radcliffe Fellowship at the Radcliffe Institute for advanced study at Harvard University to research and conduct interviews with women who lost children to adoption in the 50s and 60s. The resulting book, The Girls Who Went Away, was chosen as one of the top 5 nonfiction books of 2006 by the National Book Critics Circle and received the Ballard Book Prize, given annually to a female author who makes a significant contribution to the dialogue about women's rights. In 2012, her film, A Girl Like Her, was released by Women Make Movies in New York. The film combines footage from educational films and newsreels about dating, sex, illegitimate pregnancy, and adoption from the time period, with the voices of the mothers as they speak today about the long-term impact of surrender and silence on their lives. Her work is included in numerous collections, including the Whitney Museum, Museum of Modern Art, the Center for Creative Photography in Tucson, the Museum of Fine Arts, Houston, and the RISD Museum. So welcome, Anne.
Thank
We're
you.
glad to have you here tonight.
Thank you. It's great to be with you guys.
And welcome everyone again.
I should say.
Yeah, we'd like to start off with just share a little bit about your personal story and just what motivated you to write your book and to produce a film.
Okay, so I have to provide a little bit of context here because I did not actually, when I started my work with adoption, I did not start by thinking I was going to write a book. And so the kind of backstory to all that is that my work for many years before I started interviewing women was about some of the things you've mentioned. It was in the blurb about the happy hour talk. And that is that I've been really interested in the impact of images, media images on women's lives and intimate relationships. And that started in maybe mid-70s with an interest in women, pictures of women, depictions of women in advertising, and also related to issues of body image and all these sorts of things. And then over time, that grew to a wider scope. And what I really became interested in and have been for probably 30 years is what I call the gap between recorded history and lived history. So the gap between the history that we all learn in school, that we have sort of a common cultural understanding of our history, and that same history is understood by the people who actually experienced it. And as we all know, those two things can be very different. Somebody has the pen, right? Somebody is writing that history and making decisions and making choices about what's worthy to be part of a kind of larger cultural history. And having grown up at a time, I graduated from high school in 1967. So, I grew up at a time when women's stories, women's history, even studying art, women, there were no women, no slides on the screen of women artists. I mean, it was male genius was, all what history of art was at that time. And so I really became interested in these notions, these gaps that were there. And so I was really kind of prepared for, as they say, chance favors the prepared mind. I was prepared for something that happened to me in the late 80s or mid to late 80s, prepared to think about it in a way that had a tremendous impact on my life. And that was that I was teaching in an art school in Baltimore, and anybody who's read my book has read something about this story, so I'll try to abbreviate it a little bit. But I was at a gallery opening, and when I walked in, I saw a woman who looked really familiar to me. And I had a distinct memory of having talked to her very recently, but I could not place where that was. I couldn't remember where, and I knew she wasn't from the school. So I thought, well, it's out of context. Maybe she works at a store that I go in. I just could not place her, but I knew I just had a conversation with her. And I actually asked several people at the opening, who is that woman over there? And nobody knew who she was. And a little bit later, I saw her cross the room and start, making a beeline for me. And I thought, oh my God, I can't remember her name. I don't know where I know her from. And everybody's had that experience of kind of wrapping your brain for, where do I know, who is this person? And she walked right up to me and with no introduction whatsoever said, you could be my long lost daughter. You are the perfect combination of myself and the father of my child. And I started to actually have kind of a physical reaction to that. I started to feel kind of faint, how if you almost faint, it's like it starts, darkness sort of closes in around the edges and you're kind of focused right on a kind of the center of your vision. And I said, you don't know what you're saying to me. I was adopted. I could be your daughter. And then she started to have a kind of physical reaction. And the two of us stood there in this gallery with all this commotion all around us. And we were just staring at each other's face for a minute, trying to see if we recognized anything. And she said, "When is your birthday?" And I told her, and we discovered that we were only 1 year and 1 month off. And she said, "Are you sure that you know your birthday? Because a lot of times records are changed to cover tracks." And I said, "Yes, I'm really sure." And so we started a conversation. And in that conversation, you know, she, of course, said, "Have you looked for your mother?" And well, let me back up. She said that she was a mother. She had surrendered her daughter, and she wanted to know, had I looked for my mother? And I said, "Oh, you know, she probably wouldn't want to know me. I'm a skeleton in her closet." No, that's, you know, the wrath came down on me, and she started pointing, and she said, "You have no idea. You know, she probably worries every single day about, you know, what has happened to you and whether you've had a good life." And it was that in and of itself was kind of the big light bulb going off. And as I talked to her, we actually spent the rest of the evening talking, because she hadn't really talked about this much with anyone. And I had never heard the story of adoption from out of the mouth of a mom who had lost her child. I thought I understood adoption because I was an adoptee. I was adopted into a family where my adoptive mother was also an adoptee. I had an adopted brother, so nobody in my family was related. It was all put together by adoption. And it seemed, you know, growing up, that just was normal to me. And I thought I understood it. But of course, I could only imagine. So, I mean, I thought it's the same thing happened to me, you know, as a young girl, that I understood the stigma. I understood what, you know, the social stigma and pressures, and imagined in my head, if that happened to me, that I would probably do the same thing as my mother, and never thought of that as I mean, I just assumed that's what women did. But I, of course, had never had a child, so I didn't understand it from the point of view of a mother, and that's the whole difference, right? I can only understand it through my personal experiences, which is being scared shitless if my period was late, right? So, as I'm talking to her, it really kind of hit home that this was the first time I heard this story from the point of view of a mom who lost her child, and that this was, I understood immediately, why would this be any different than losing a child in any other way? But it took speaking to her one-on-one to make that connection. Now, the weird thing is that this woman, the reason she was familiar to me is that she was in my dream the night before we met. That's why she was familiar to me. So this is one of those things where, you know, you're sort of getting hit over the head by the stars are lining up, and you are learning that this is something you sort of need to deal with now. And so I had a sabbatical coming up in at the end of the year, and I knew then and there that I was going to turn my attention to focus on adoption. And I began working with autobiographical material. I did a film about my adopted mother, because she's quite a bit older than my mom, and I figured that if I was ever going to do anything about her experiences, and she's also an adoptee, as I said, that I needed to do that right away. And during that time, I'm trying to figure out, how can I try to capture these stories? And as I started screening that film, and I did another big installation project that was autobiographical and about meeting this woman, I kept encountering people from the adoption community, which I hadn't before, because again, this is the 80s, and I had not thought I was going to search. I understood how I could be a skeleton in someone's closet. You know, that was the thinking back then. And so I hadn't intended to search, but when I found this woman, or when this woman found me, or whatever happened, it changed my mind. And I ended up, a year later, she was living down the block from me. and she had been living a couple hours away. And so I became suspicious that she actually was my mother, but was afraid to tell me because I had said I didn't know, if I wanted to make contact. And so as a result of that, I sent for my birth certificate, and having been born in Ohio, I was entitled to that birth certificate. I didn't know it until I actually contacted Ohio, the state of Ohio, and I learned that all along I could have had my original birth certificate. And so within a short period of time, I had my mother's name and the town that she was living in when she gave birth to me. So all of this really centered around this meeting this woman as a kind of, chance or design. I don't know what it was, but that's how things started. And once I started meeting more people through showing this other work that I had done, this autobiographical work, I learned very quickly as people approached me and told me their stories that I was just learning about the tip of the iceberg, that there was an entire community and many thousands, tens of thousands of women out there who felt exactly like this woman did that I met. And I didn't know that because I was very well versed in women's history, of course, but I never heard that story. And so I was determined I wanted to insert this story back into women's history. And I was committed to collecting these stories and preserving them and disseminating them. And that still for me is in many ways the most important part of this project. I mean, I did my book and I did the film, but to me, what's the most valuable about what I have done is the 100 very lengthy, probably 3 hours average interviews with moms. And those will eventually go into an archive, and they will be there forever, meaning hundreds and hundreds of years from now, when people look back on this period of time and want to know something about adoption or the mom's point of view, those will be there for research purposes. And so for me, that's a really important part of this project. That was a very long answer. Go ahead.
That's quite all right. That's quite all right. Yeah, there's a lot there I wanted to ask you about. Do you have a relationship with that woman today?
I don't. As a matter of fact, I tried about a year after I met that woman, I tried to find her, and she had moved again to somewhere in Pennsylvania. And I tried to find her because my first idea about a project was going to be to work with her and do some kind of a project where both of our stories were intertwined, and you wouldn't understand until the end that we weren't a match set, but that it didn't really matter because we were, I was telling the story from the adoptee's point of view, and she would be telling the story from the mom's point of view, but she had sort of disappeared, and the person that she knew at the exhibition, the reason why she was there, a graduate student I've been working with, she didn't know where she was either. So she kind of, disappeared. So I never got to she never knew what an impact she had on me.
Wow. And that's true when we do share our stories. That's very true. That ripple effect, you never know who's going to be on the receiving line, but it's so valuable that you step out and share it. So thank you for being able to, those stories are a part of our history now. And you're right, that's very, very valuable. So you mentioned something about when you received your birth certificate from Ohio. Tell us about holding that birth certificate for the first time and how that made you feel, and what was running through your mind.
Well, again, I feel like in some ways this was all predestined. It's like I kept getting pushed and pushed and pushed into this direction because for example, when I got the birth certificate in the mail, there was a phone message on my machine, on my answering machine, asking me when I wanted to, what flight I was planning to take to come into a town where I was having an exhibit. The exhibit was called Parents, and it was the first work I did telling that story of meeting that woman. And when I got the birth certificate, it turns out that my mother lived in a town about an hour and a half away from where I was flying in to do that show. And so I'm like, well, I guess I'm gonna drive to that town and poke around and try to find a yearbook picture. And so it was interesting that she had since moved to a different town, but her high school was in that town. And so I could go and try to find a yearbook picture. And I think I was more at that moment, more sort of shocked by the way these things kept just falling in line. I mean, like I would get these offerings, you know, like here's a free trip to, you know, a town right near where your mother lived and grew up, you know, and I just felt like I was, you know, sometimes when you feel like you're on the right path, all these things kind of fall in line in a way that takes little effort maybe. And I was, you know, I was kind of overwhelmed in some ways by looking at it. I had always known that the birth certificate I had been altered because my adoptive parents, since my adopted mother was an adoptee herself, and her mother would never admit that to her. So she was very up for anything she knew, she passed on to me. And so I had, you know, files that had information in them that I could go and look at from the time I was very young. So I had some information, but seeing her name was, you know, kind of overwhelming. And seeing that I didn't grow up that far away from her. I mean, she kind of went to the next biggest town in a way. She could have chosen to there were two towns that would have been within a couple hours of where she was in a very rural area where she could have gone to a maternity home. And so I ended up where I ended up and ended up with my parents because of the maternity home she chose. And so you start to connect all these dots and all these things that had been a mystery start to, like, you know, gel, and you start seeing the patterns. And so.
So I read that you were 56 when you met her. Was that correct?
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah.
So from the time that you held your original birth certificate in your hands,
yeah,
how much time had passed before you met her?
Oh, you're all gonna groan. It was about 13 or 14 years. And everybody's like, how could you avoid it? And part of the, you know, it's the same old adoptee thing where you're trying to juggle the feelings of the people who you spent your life with, your adoptive parents, the people who raised you. And my parents were totally dedicated to my brother and I. I mean, their whole life was, you know, raising us as best they could. And they did recognize that neither of us were going to be, you know, the sum of their parts, and we're not maybe going to have the same interests or the same, you know, so they never pushed, they always supported whatever it was that we were interested in, even if they didn't understand it or like it. They recognized that we were our own discrete, you know, individuals that had a different history and different DNA, and they respected that. So it was, and my mother was, my adoptive mother was, I would say, insecure about her status as a mother because she was born in 1913, and she felt really awful that she could not provide her husband with his child. She was the problem in terms of having children. She could get pregnant, but she couldn't carry a child to full term, which is why they turned to adoption. And she carried that like guilt with her. She felt very bad about that. And so it was very hard for me to potentially make that even more difficult for her, in that I knew she worried, you know, that if I found my real mother, that she would worry that I might like abandon her as my mother. And this was palpable in terms of her we talked, I mean, we talked openly about adoption, but she always said, I don't think it's a good idea for an adoptee to look for their mother. If the mother finds them, I think that's okay, but I don't think it's a good idea. Now, who do you think she was talking about? She's telling me secondhand, don't look for your mother, right? And she was 17 years older than my first mother. So I just, you know, I didn't want to crush her at the end of her life. And so I let it ride. I was also very conscious of the stigma during my time in high school. And I could only imagine that my mother, who graduated from high school in 1946 or 7, I could only imagine how bad it was then. And I was really concerned that she had not told anybody and that she would be not traumatized, but but this would be potentially unwelcome, my contacting her. And as it turned out, she had not told anybody except her husband, who had passed away. And so, and her father, who had passed away. She hadn't even told her mother when she went away to the maternity home. She said she was going to another town to get a job. So my instincts were right in that she had kept her secret very, very deep and did not want anybody to know. She was really shamed by it and didn't want people to look at her. Again, she was, born in 30. So she, you know, it was very tough for her. And she didn't want anybody to know. None of her brothers or sisters knew, and she did not want the secret out. But she was willing to meet me, and interestingly, eventually she did tell her subsequent children. It took her 5 years. And when she told them not even to tell their spouses, which of course they did immediately, but that's how afraid she was of the secret getting out. And so, again, my instincts about how she might be keeping this, you know, close to her chest, that was accurate.
So for those of you that haven't read the book, I don't want to give anything away, but I'll ask this question. At the end of the book,
yeah.
Okay, at the end of the book, and you meet your mom.
Yeah.
Did she ever tell you the name of your father?
She did not. She, you know, when I originally asked her when we first met, she said, well, I don't know if he ever told his wife. I don't want to start any trouble. I mean, she lived in a very rural community and then moved to another nearby rural community. And so she was really, you know, like I said, keeping this under wraps. I also know that she suspected that if I found him, that he would be open, he wouldn't have the same stigma around this issue, and that he would be open and the secret would be out. So she would not tell me, but I did figure it out. I used DNA. I took 2 different DNA tests and waited for the results to come in. I waited for someone, I don't know that much about doing that kind of research, but I knew that if someone showed up on my list that was like a first or second cousin, I could probably figure it out. So I, you know, put in my information on both Ancestry and 23andMe and waited. And within about 1.5 years, I think it was 2 years, all of a sudden somebody showed up, and it was my niece. It was my father's side of the family, because you can compare who's on what side. You know, she didn't match, this person didn't match with, I had my half brother on my maternal side take the test so that I could tell who was on which side of the family. So somebody showed up that did not match him, so that meant that they matched my father's side. And she was, she turned out to be my niece, the daughter of one of my sisters on my father's side. And I knew that they had met working together, And I had calculated that neither of them at 19 and 20 years old had driven more than about 30 miles to work. So I knew that I kind of drew a circle around where she met him, because I knew they met at work, and figured he had to be from one of those towns within a 30, 40 mile radius. And so when she showed up, I also started doing research on, regular research on ancestry. And it didn't take too long to figure out. I knew his approximate age, and his name was very prominent in a particular town that was close to her town. And so I figured it out. As it turned out, though, he had passed away even before I met her. She didn't know that. So I have since met all of my siblings on that side of the family, as well as my siblings on my mother's side. But it was too late to meet him.
I'm sorry. But you did get some answers.
I did get some answers. I absolutely got some answers. And they had been going steady, they were a couple.
Are you in a relationship with any siblings today?
Yeah, I keep in touch with the siblings on both sides. And I did have a chance, what was it, 2 years ago now, I think, I had a chance to go and get together with my mother and all of her subsequent children and their husbands and wives, and my husband and myself, and all together at a restaurant, which was, they couldn't believe that she actually went for it, that she was willing to do that, because she was so, concerned about the secrecy. But it was the last time I saw her, and I talked to her separately, and she did confirm. I told her I thought I had figured out who my father was. And when I told her, she said, yes, that's who it is. So she confirmed it.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, what I'd like to do right now, if you don't mind, Ann, we're going to pause for a second. And Jennifer, would you like to share Ann's trailer? Let's just take a moment and watch the trailer.
I was 15 that summer, and I don't even remember what we did. Probably drove around in his car. He had a baby blue 57 Chevy. Riding in that car, and I felt really important. Wow, this is what dating is like.
I mean, things were a lot different then. And no one talked about sex. There was no sex education in school.
I could tell that he knew a little bit more, and as ridiculous as it sounds, I was learning from him.
I started gaining weight, and I missed my second period, and I still tried to deny it.
My mom treated it like it was her personal tragedy. My parents' generation, that greatest generation, that's what they thought. It didn't happen to nice girls, but nice girls do get pregnant.
They called the doctor. The doctor said, well, you send her away to a home for unwed mothers, and she gives the child up, and it'll all blow over.
My mother came and got me and let me stay at home for a few weeks. I was 3 months pregnant, and she said, you don't look it now, but you will soon, and so I want you out of this house. And she said, if you keep your baby, never come back.
You're going to be taken care of, but you're going to have that baby, and you are going to do the only thing that is right, and that is you're going to give this baby to good people, decent people, because you are so bad and so flawed for just having this happen. There's no way you could possibly provide what a child would need.
I just felt like I had done this horrific thing, and I was not in any position to protest or say, what I wanted. Certainly, I wasn't in any position to say, well, is there any way that my baby wouldn't have to be taken? I mean,
people say to me, oh, it's not that way anymore. I said, it's still that way for a lot of us. A lot of my sisters are still suffering.
I don't think people realize how many women lost their babies.
this young woman that they locked away was not allowed to have her voice.
Thank you. Well, that's powerful.
Yeah, I'm gonna make it clear to everyone, that's a trailer. It's a couple minutes long. The film is 48 minutes, I think, long. And also a warning that if you go to look it up, 2 years after I did my film, somebody else did a film entitled it A Girl Like Her. So if you search for it, you have to put my name plus the title of the film, A Girl Like Her, and you'll see information on it and, you know, whatever, or if you want a DVD copy of it. It's
Right.
not.
We'll put the links in the chat bar
Okay.
for both your book and the documentary. So this process of the interviewing all of these women, how did you even begin to organize that, and how did all that work?
It was really slow at the beginning. You have to remember that when I started, this is before Google, right? You can't just Google all this and find people, right? So I had done a few projects, exhibitions where the place that had the exhibition helped me organize community outreach, where you tell people in the community, anybody in connection with adoption, come in and, you know, take part in some talks and things. And I met a few people that way. And then I started, you could look up newspaper articles, and I found an article at one point. I mean, I was really searching, trying to figure out, I didn't know anything about support groups. Again, there's just no way to search a lot of this stuff at that time. And so I did find an article from a newspaper in Hartford, Connecticut. And again, at the time I'm in Rhode Island, where a newspaper reporter had written a little story about a building that was being torn down that was a former maternity home. And that reporter managed to find a couple of moms from the area to interview anonymously. They didn't want to be identified, but they could say a little bit about what it was like to be there. And so I saw this, I found that through the search, and I contacted that person. I said, I know you can't give up your sources, but would you please be willing to send this little prospectus, this description of what I'm doing, to the people you're in contact with? And they said, oh, of course. And I had a lot of people contact me as a result of the article. So that person helped me a little bit. And then I did a project that was an audio installation using the voices of women from the Baltimore, Washington area. And so that was an exhibition format, and the curator and all the people that he knew helped me find some people in the Baltimore, Washington area. So it just kept spreading out and spreading out. And then what happened was, when I used the work I'd done so far to try to get I kept applying to things, trying to get funding to travel, because it was very important to me that I interview everyone in person. I wasn't going to do phone call interviews. These are oral histories, and they really need to be one-on-one, you know, oral history. So, and I was going to record them. So I had to control the environment and get a good recording, because I wanted to use the audio in the film. And so what happened was, I got that Radcliffe Fellowship. And what happened was the Boston Globe did a big feature article, because there was a woman there who saw something about, they look at who's coming in to do fellowships each year. And she saw this project, that this is what I was working on. She got really interested. She contacted me and said, I'd love to do a feature piece in the Boston Globe about your research. And I gave her some excerpts from some interviews I'd already done in the close to home where I could travel by car. And that article ended up just blowing everything up, because what happened was, it was just the beginning of people sending links, you know, on the internet. And so I spent the first month I was in my office at Radcliffe responding to emails. And a lot of them were from people who said, that happened to my roommate, that happened to my aunt, that happened to my grandmother, that happened to my sister. And so I would write everyone back and say, where are you? Because my project for the Radcliffe Fellowship was to interview people in the New England area, because you were supposed to be there. You weren't supposed to leave. You needed to be in residence. So I could, in someplace I could drive to and come back. So, but other people saw the article and they sent the link, and it went all over the country. And each person that responded, you know, again, they very often weren't the moms themselves. They were other people who knew somebody and sent it to them. And so I started a database of people who eventually, through some, you know, exchange via email, said they'd be willing to be interviewed. And I'd have to say, sit tight. I don't know if I can get to Texas. I'm planning to one day, but just sit tight and I'll contact you when I'm going to that area. And so it was very important for me to interview people from every region of the country, because I didn't want it to be seen as a, you know, East Coast, you know, what they think of East Coast girls in the Midwest, right? So I wanted to make sure that it represented every area. And so I, as soon as I was done with the project at Radcliffe, I was in the process of working on that and interviewing people when the opportunity presented itself to do a book, because people started contacting me and saying this should be a book. And I'm like, I'm busy. I'm trying to put together this audio installation. I only have so much time. I have 2 interviews booked every day. I can't, you know. And so eventually then I said, wow, this is a better opportunity. I'll put the film on hold, because I was interviewing, getting the voices for the film. I'll put the film on hold and I'll start working on the book. And I spent a lot of time at Radcliffe because I had access to all the Harvard libraries, and I could do a lot of deep research there. And that's when I really started learning about the context of that period of time. I mean, I lived that period of time, but you don't understand it in the same way. And that's when I started figuring out how many women were affected and so on and so forth. And so the next year, when that fellowship ended, I took a year off of teaching, which is hard to do. I had already been away a year. I took a year off, and I spent that year traveling, doing fly drive things where I would go to, you know, the upper Midwest, to Texas, to California, to Deep South, and interviewing people. And a lot of those were people I found through these contacts, through, you know, person to person to person, after that article had come out. In the meantime, I discovered a lot of the major players in the adoption community, but I really felt strongly that within that community, a lot of those people already had a voice, or they had written a book or something. I was really interested in trying to find women who had not talked about it, who hadn't developed the language for talking about it, and weren't using the same terminology. They were just simply pouring their heart out to me. And that's what I was really interested in, was you know, the woman who'd never talked about it, the woman who'd never told her husband, that sort of thing. And I knew nothing about their stories. I asked them, what state was your pregnancy in? What year was it? And what state do you live in now? That's all I wanted to know, because it was the only way I could get a kind of somewhat unbiased sample. And I tried to get as many, like, for example, if there was somebody who lived in Massachusetts, but this happened in Iowa, then I put them at the top of the list, because I might not be able to get to Iowa, but they represented that experience in Iowa, if you follow me. So I tried to get as much diversity, and then taking these trips and getting people, you know, who were still in these other areas. And it was really, really important to me. And I discovered that it didn't matter whether somebody was from South Carolina or Texas or Oregon or Maine, their stories were practically interchangeable.
And a total of how many women did you interview, and how many states did it represent?
Oh, it represented every region of the country, but not every state. So I was in the Northwest, again, you know, Seattle, Oregon, California. I didn't actually interview in Arizona or New Mexico. I interviewed in Texas, and many cities in Texas, in the Midwest, in, you know, the Northeast, in South Carolina, North Carolina, I think Georgia, pretty much, I mean, every region was well represented. And you asked another question.
I was asking how many women total you interviewed?
100.
100. Okay.
I felt it was important to get at least 100. And when I got to 100, at that point, I'd already committed to doing a book, and I was doing a lot of research at the same time, academic research. And so when I got to 100, I felt like all the stories that I was getting were, there was enough repetition. I could glean enough of a sense of being able to represent what the women wanted to say to a public, that I felt like I had enough. And I was running out of time, so I felt 100 was enough.
Okay, so I'd like to ask you one last question, and then I would like to open it up to our viewers and give them some time to share with you. So how has this changed your life, Anne?
Oh my God.
Just a couple of different ways it's changed your life.
It totally changed my life. My previous visual art career is gone. It's all about this. I still get, I would say, at least, it varies week to week, but no less than 3 or 4 emails every week. And it's 14 years after the book came out.
Wow.
People who have just run across the book. And so you can imagine in the beginning, that was a full-time job, because I try to reply to every single person who writes me. And sometimes I get the most, I sit there at my computer with tears running down my face, because I get people, because they feel like it's okay and I'm not, they can trust me. I'm not going to be spreading their story around without their permission. So I get, people sometimes just tell me tremendous amount about their life, and I'll start a conversation with them through email. Sometimes they send me pictures of reunions. I get emails from moms and adoptees, and then I get some from fathers. Not nearly as many, but I do get some. And I actually have done some interviews with fathers, which have been pretty interesting, but I'm not sure what I'm going to do with them yet. At one point, I thought about doing a kind of podcast where I would take my edited interviews and, release them that way. And that could be, moms, adoptees, fathers, like everybody in that immediate kind of circle. Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. So exciting. Well, listen, let's take a second here and go ahead and open it up to all of you out there. If you could raise your virtual hand or take yourself off of mute, who would like to ask Anne the first question? If not, I still have some more I can ask.
Don't be afraid.
Oh, I'm waving my hand, but I might be on one of the other screens you're not seeing.
Susan.
Okay, it's Suzanne Gilbert. I'm fascinated with the passage of time. I'm in New Jersey, so we finally restored access in 2017. And over the years, I'd been talking to Fred Greenman. I got to interview him like 15 years before that for Lilith magazine. Do you ever think about doing kind of a follow-up with some of these same moms, now that some of them may have had reunions
I do.
More babies?
The short answer is yes. I've had so many different kinds of ideas about, first of all, the book only is like the tip of the iceberg of those interviews. There's probably 300 hours of tape, right? And so, for example, the film's 48 minutes long, right? And so you're only hearing, I tried to use as many women's voices as possible, but you're only hearing a few. In the book, you have little excerpts, and some of those small excerpts are just fantastic long interviews, but I don't want to repeat myself. And so there's been a lot of different ideas about what that could be, like how to continue it. Again, one is to actually do more with the audio. The other is to do, something where I look at the whole circle around an adoption. So it could be the mother, the birth father, the adoptee, even if any of their, grandparents or anybody, like how has it affected them? There's just lots and lots of ways to expand, but it's, it's a bit overwhelming. I'm not spring chicken anymore. I have to figure out what's possible. And, right now, everything that I'm doing is kind of on hold because I interview in person, and with COVID, everything came to a screeching halt. So, and I do record all my interviews when I send people a prospectus on, how it might be used and make sure they're fully informed before I do an interview. I make it clear that my goal is to get this out to the public. And so if they don't feel comfortable having their voice, they can use an alias, but if they don't feel comfortable having their voice used, then I probably can't travel to do the, travel across the country to meet with them and do an interview because it's not something I can use, right? Which sounds harsh, but at the same time, I only have so many limited resources and travel is expensive. And my point is to get these stories out there. And in many ways, the film does that, gets it out to people who would never read a book about adoption. Because there are a lot of people who just think it doesn't pertain to me. Well, they don't know in their own family, it probably does, but they just don't think it's something of particular interest to them. And there's, you only have so many hours in the day and it might not be something they want to read about, but the film is used in like college courses. So young women are seeing it in gender studies courses and they're learning about this. And I can tell you when I travel to colleges, what I used to do before COVID, to talk about it after screenings, they're shocked. They're absolutely shocked that this could have gone on, and so it's a good way to get all of not all the information, but a good hunk of information in a short period of time and be able to have a discussion. Whereas reading a book is a bigger commitment. So that makes me wonder whether, something audio online or a different kind of form might be more, get out to a larger audience. So that's part of, what I have to weigh.
Interesting. I look forward to whatever it turns out to be.
Thank you. And thanks for your work in adoption.
Thank you, Suzanne. Okay, who's next?
I think Jeff has a question for Anne. Jeffrey.
Or Jeffrey?
Jeffrey, where are you? You have to take yourself off mute.
Me or the other Jeff?
Oh, no, you, Jeff. Didn't you have one?
No, I just have a comment I'd like to make.
Right.
I have a kind of an unusual connection to Anne's book. My wife was reading it when I discovered I was adopted.
Oh my God.
And I used to be an elementary school art teacher, and she was on the chapter about the girl who was in college and had to leave. That person, I won't use her name here, but she's a very close friend of mine now. We met a few years ago, and I just remember we were at the adoptee rights protest in Chicago. She said, "Geez, Jeff, I wish you were my son because you're a lot more like me than he could ever be." And it just made me laugh so hard because I hadn't found my family yet. And I did shortly after that. It took about 6 years. But, we've got that connection. And then my wife went insane buying copies of your book through Amazon quite a few years ago. She bought around 24 copies.
What?
Yeah. We were using it. We were giving them away whenever I had a lobby with a legislator to try to get a bill passed in New York. We'd leave a copy of your book behind.
Oh my
And
God.
it influenced.
At least.
Well, it influenced quite a few legislators here in New York. We got our bill passed. And the one that seemed to really resonate was my adoptive mom was still alive when we gave her a copy of your book for her birthday in 2010, I think it was. She was very judgmental on birth mothers in general, kind of holier than thou about the whole adoption thing. Tightly wound Christian, the whole thing. And so we gifted her a copy of your book for her birthday. And she never really said anything negative again after that. But anyhow, I just wanted to say thank you for this. I love your film. I love your book. A big fan of your work, especially with the art connection as well. But thank you for coming tonight and for sharing your skills so generously.
Thanks very much. Very nice of you.
Thanks, Jeff. Good to see you again tonight.
You too, Pam.
That was Marcie.
Oh, hi, Marcie. Hey, nice to see you too.
Thank you. I didn't know we sounded that much alike.
Well, we're just one person.
It must be a Midwestern thing. I don't know.
It is. We love you, Jeff. I think Darren had a question too. You want to ask yours, Darren? Or do you want me to ask it? You can ask it. You're good at it, so you do it.
I've seen your film and also listened to your book on audiobooks, and they're wonderful. I want to ask you, what is your opinion on why so many birth or first mothers tend to reject or not want contact with the adoptees that they relinquish? Or do you have an opinion on that?
Yeah, well, in my experience, the most common reason is because they have not been upfront with their subsequent children, and in some cases their husband, about their experiences, and they fear the same kind of rejection they felt when, you know, they went through this in the first place, when everybody sort of abandoned them and didn't stick by them or support them, and they fear losing the love and respect of the people that are now in their life. I think it's very hard for people to shake, you know, when they've been stigmatized to that degree. I think it's very hard for people to, you know, just say, oh, it's all different now. People aren't going to, you know, think less of me now, when so many people did at that time. I mean, you know, you were ostracized. I don't know, you know, what era exactly you're talking about, or if you're talking about a specific person, a specific time, but I know that when I was growing up, you know, if somebody in my high school, you know, left suddenly, and the rumor was that she was pregnant, nobody hung around with her when she came back. It was, you know, guilt by association, and to prove your, you know, even other girls were having sex with their boyfriends, right? They had to, you know, reject that woman because they would be seen as sluts or whores or, you know, all that kind of thing. And it was real at that time. I mean, you know, people were mean about it. It's so different now. I think it's very hard for anybody who grew up after that time to really feel what it was like then, and how much that ruined your reputation, and how that affected lots of things. You know, you were told that no good man would ever want you. You know, if they knew this about you, your whole life would change. You know, if you kept your child, you were doomed to a certain kind of, you know, low class status. And it was really awful. And thank God a lot of that has changed. Not for everybody from every family, but thank God a lot of that has changed. But that was, people were very quick to judge and to reject people. I think there are a lot of women who are still living in fear of, you know, of people in their lives that they love finding out and rejecting them in the same way. They can't be sure, and so the choice is: are they going to let this, you know, person into their life and not know who that is or what that's going to mean, or are they going to hang on to the people that they hold close to them now? And for some women, you know, they don't want to take that chance.
Thank you, Darren. Elizabeth, you've got your hand up. You've been waiting for a little while. You want to take yourself off mute?
You would think this is my first time ever using Zoom. Sorry about that. It's not my first time. And you know what? And you kind of answered my question a little bit, but like and I wanted to tell you, my brother, I found, actually, he was so intrigued by the story. We share a birth father, that he actually recommended the book to me. So he was reading it. He read it, and then his wife took the copy and she read the whole thing cover to cover. But you know, my birth mother is so ashamed that, you know, and so you did kind of just cover that, but it's, you know, have you found that any of these women have sort of evolved with the times?
Yeah.
you know, like, I mean, at least even like your own mother finally, okay, I'm not going to give you the name, but I will confirm, if you find it.
Oh, no, I mean, there's probably people on this chat right now, who were secretive for a while and came out, but I think, it depends on, I'm sure, a lot of things, what the people that are in their immediate circle, their family, what the worry about what they're going to think, but also how much to what degree they became, I'll say, liberated. With my mother used to get her women's lib, to what degree at some point women had the strength to just say, screw that, I don't care what you think, this is my life and this is what happened, and like it or don't like it. So women who somewhere along the line learned that, took their power, back, and sort of felt that they could do that and didn't worry as much about the consequences. And I would say that probably depends on many things in their life, but maybe their age, their immediate surroundings, whether they're in even whether they're in an urban or rural environment. Right. It could be lots of things, because I know lots of women who told me about experiences the first time they ventured into, they saw a little ad in the paper about a support group, and they went there just scared to death to show up, which meant people there that they didn't know would know why they were there. And by hearing other people talk, gradually started to feel like they could talk because they felt they had support. And support, and that's an organization like this too, the idea that you can have support and that people are not going to judge you for what happened, because these women were judged horribly, and so I think that's a big part of it, is this this issue of judgment and whether there's a support system for someone. And
I think the shame can really play havoc on your decisions, like
absolutely.
That can outweigh, even having a relationship.
Absolutely. That was the case with my mother. She was so ashamed of what had happened to her, and of course, in that era, and in my mother's era, and even in my era, in school and whatever, it was absolutely the woman's fault if this happened, right? And so all of the shame was that she should not have allowed it to happen. And so there was just a tremendous amount of shame, piled on the women, and they felt that rejection. They felt that from their parents, they felt it from society, they felt it from friends who couldn't hang around with them anymore. And so, that really, that buries in there pretty deep, and it takes a while to come back out of that. I knew a lot of women, or I met a lot of women who were very outspoken and became very kind of liberated, if you will, in every other aspect of their life but that. And that was the last thing, but they were able to somehow over time apply that thinking to this. But I think for somebody like my mother, who never lived at a time when a woman really, she did live at that time because she only died, a few years ago. But I mean, her formative years, during her formative years and subsequent many years, she was not, she would not have been, outspoken or going against the wishes of her husband, I suspect, or, it was a different time, very, very different time.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Looks like Michelle H., you've had your hand up for a while.
Oh, there we go. Hi, Anne. Thanks for doing this tonight. My question kind of goes into like all the research that you did and some of the conversations that you would have had with the birth mothers. Yeah. What stories did you hear from about the nurses and doctors that work there, and how the babies were taken care of. I mean, being a parent myself, I know the first, hours of life that I spent with my son were so important. And I've always just been curious as to, were the babies rocked? Were they cuddled? Were they, fed on a schedule and that was the only, care they got? I've never really heard from anybody who has experience with that part of it.
It varied. The stories, that was one thing that did vary among the stories, and that didn't have anything to do with geography, but some moms got to see their baby once, some got to see them a couple of times. Some were in maternity homes where the babies actually stayed in the maternity home. One woman I know actually took care secretly, snuck into the nursery and took care and held her baby every single day. And then all of a sudden the baby was gone because it was adopted out of that maternity home. In other cases, women were not allowed to see or hold their child except for seeing them through the glass window. Some of them were treated very, very badly by nurses and doctors who basically, when they complained about the pains of labor, they were told, you should have thought of that before, kind of thing, and treated them very, with no respect, certainly, and with disdain. So that's, all over the map in terms of, but very few got to be with their baby or hold their baby more than a few times. I think because my knowledge of this comes from the women, I don't know anything about, none of them were allowed to breastfeed. They all were given medicine to dry their breasts up. But because I'm here, because the stories are coming to me through the women in terms of the hospital situation, I don't know anything about, because they didn't know anything about what was going on in the nursery when the baby was away from them. I did have women talk about hearing their baby cry down the hall. They could hear the baby crying and they knew that it was their child. And they just knew it instinctively. I mean, they had held their baby, they heard their baby cry, they could hear it down the hall, and they weren't allowed to see the baby or, hold the baby again. It's just heartbreaking, mean, punishing stuff. And a lot of people felt these women should be punished because they worried they would do it again, right? And so they were aware that some women after this have such a drive to replace the baby that they might get pregnant again. And several of the women I interviewed did. And so they really intentionally tried, in many cases, tried to, give them such a hard time and be so mean to them that the woman would not want to go through that again. Sad.
Great.
Yeah.
Great. In the comments field, we have a couple of questions. One is from Jude. It says, what role do you think visual arts have in creating space for the adoptee voice?
Creating space for?
The adoptee voice.
Oh. Well, I always have felt that the visual arts is a great platform for reaching an audience. That's why, one of the reasons I got involved in the visual arts to begin with. And so I think people within the visual arts realm, there's a lot of interest in personal stories. And artists had the freedom to create the work they want to create. There is a gatekeeper there, you've got to have somebody who wants to show it. And so it has to be in some ways both, compelling as a piece of art and as a story. But I think I'm a big believer that the arts are a fabulous way to have a platform and to get stories out into the world.
Good question. There was also another question in the chat bar. I believe that was from Keith. about, do you know of any films that are in the works? Or have you considered anything about family preservation? Any documentary about family preservation?
I don't know of anything that's in the works, and I haven't considered anything about family preservation because almost all of my visual work pulls images from the culture and turns them back onto the culture. So in other words, you see that my film is all old footage. And so that would be a different kind of documentary, in that you would, in my way of thinking about that, you would probably need to be following a family through a process of them wrestling with this ability to keep or not, their child. So it's a different kind of documentary than the kind I make. I did make a live documentary of my adoptive mother, but that was a little different because, she's just allowed me to follow her around, when I was home for a week, and basically film her constantly. And it's a little different when you're, doing a film where you need to go into somebody else's space and follow a long process like that. And that's, it's not really my way of working, but it's a good idea for a film. It's a very good idea.
I think so too. Wendy, you had your hand up for a little while, or did you already?
Yes. My question was in reference to the research that you had done. Since, doing the research about, and I hope I don't offend anybody with this question, but because there's so much now coming out about adoptions in the States, how come there's, I'm not sure if I'm verbalizing this well, but I'm just wondering, throughout your research, why is there more attention on international adoptees as opposed to adoptees in the States, since there's a lot that seems to be coming out more about adoptees and helping them to either be reunited or at least be led in a path where they can find out more information.
So you're saying that there's much more attention paid to adoptions that are international adoptions than adoptions within the United States?
Yes, and I'm just wondering, with your research, have you found out any reason why that would be, opposed to, because there's so much pain with adoption in the States?
There was nothing that really showed up in my research, but I have to say that people in the States don't want to hear it. For example, some years ago, there was I don't know if you know the documentary film series that's called Point of View, POV. They feature documentary films from the US and all over the world. And it won, a couple of years before my film was finished, they did a segment on adoption. And every single person, every film that they showed as part of that series was either connected to an international adoption or an adoption of, like, an African-American child to a white family. Nobody seemed to want to touch the adoption within the white community. I can tell you, just from trying to get, information out, the information that I've researched that has to do with the big boom in adoptions, people People really don't want to hear anything bad about adoption. They want to hang on to the this kind of happy, everything's great. Adoption is, wonderful. People who adopt are rescuers and fabulous, and which I'm not putting a downer on adoption because I'm not anti-adoption, but I feel like it's very, very hard to get that kind of information out into the larger, community. People do not want to hear about it. Whether that has to, for everything, for example, if I wanted to have my film on television, that would have to go through a whole series of steps. People would, along the way, would have to say yes, 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 right? It's not just, I can't just put it on. There are gatekeepers for all these things. And I think that, there are probably a lot of gatekeepers who might feel personally like they don't, like offended, or they don't, maybe their adoptive families, they don't want to be seen as somebody who has taken somebody else's child or whatever. I think it's problematic. It's very, very hard to get this information out into the world and have people be empathetic outside of the larger adoption community. Yes, with a lot of women and women's studies and people who are interested in this as history, but I think in general, people really want to stick with this, happy adoption story, and don't want to recognize loss that happens for everybody in adoption: adoptive parents, adoptees, and moms. Even though it's been well documented, it's just not something people want to hear.
Thank you.
Sorry to be such a bummer.
Okay, we've got Kendall next. She has her hand up. She has a question.
Oh, hi. Yes, Anne, thank you so much. This is my first time here tonight, and I just had a couple quick questions on what you were just saying a minute ago. What are some things people that may want to engage in advocacy could do, like locally or at their state level, where you're centering adoptees' voices and also advocating for birth mothers and letting people know some of the stuff that we're talking about tonight? And I know you just talked about gatekeeping, so I was just wondering if you had any suggestions about that.
Yeah, all these things are about educating people, and so I think that happens one-on-one, and it happens when somebody, it could be teaming up with organizations. It can happen in any way that people, in any channels that people use to get information out into the world, So I wish I knew the answer, like what was the answer to get all of a sudden get the attention on this that it deserves. But I think certainly in states that have passed open records legislation, a lot of attention, a lot of articles in the paper bring the attention to this, and usually have embedded in them some bits and pieces of stories when they interview moms and adoptees. I have to say that one thing I didn't really take into consideration was when my book came out. Only so many people are going to read that book, but the reviews of the book that were in the New York Times and the Chicago Tribune and all kinds of papers, I felt like more people were educated by those reviews. And I'm talking about in-depth reviews where they quoted from the women and really took us kind of a stance on the tragedy of all this, that more people learned about what I was trying to get out there in the world than learned it from my book.
Mm-hmm.
I think using existing channels to the degree they can be used. And so that involves people telling stories, trying to connect with people who, again, the gatekeeper thing, people who write stories for papers, who might be interested in a human interest story, might be interested in a reunion story, but can be broadened into something that's maybe more expansive, that takes into consideration the larger picture. You see a lot of things online of people hugging and reunions and those kinds of things, but they're not in any context. You know, you don't get a sense of you know, the full picture of how many women this happened to. It's all happy reunion. Those are the ones that are, you know, this is the way the media is. It features, you know, either really happy or really sad stories, and there's not like the big picture. So, you know, I guess, you know, like I said, getting existing organizations that have an interest in pregnancy and motherhood and birth control and, you know, all these kinds of organizations, trying to educate them. I've done a number of talks with Planned Parenthood events, and basically talk strictly about, you know, well, all the women, certainly during my time, we were becoming, you know, more outspoken about wanting to have the ability to choose to not have a child if we wanted, and have a career that all of us liberated women were not thinking about the women who wanted to mother and that opportunity was being taken away from them. And so I try to educate, you know, those groups as well, to so that if they get into a situation where they have, you know, the opportunity, they're educated to pass on information, right? So I think any, you know, I think you start local, you work out, you find people to collaborate with, and organizations that have an interest, but not maybe this specifically, but have an interest in women's issues, pregnancy, motherhood, all those kinds of things.
No, I love that answer. Thank you so much. I was taking notes. One last quick question. Do you have any suggestions for birth moms during this time, during that time period, that are resources or places they can connect? And I know this is my first time here tonight, so I think this might be one of those places, but any other groups?
Yeah, well, certainly this organization, and then there's Concerned United Birth Parents, and American Adoption Congress. They're each a little different, and they each emphasize different things. They have conferences, and if you're interested in learning, I would say go to every one of the conferences for each organization, so you can learn what the differences are and what they stress. There's days of panel discussions, and you really get an education.
Okay, thank you.
Other people who are interested in, you know, some of the same ideas. So.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Kendall. And yes, please come back. We're here every Friday night, so we'd love to have you back. I think we've got time for one more question. And Rich has had his hand up, also known as David Quint. Still have your picture of David up.
Yeah, thanks. And I have my fall trees up and I look like the Phantom of the Opera on my screen. So sorry about that. I'm waiting to pick up some food. At any rate, as a follow-on to Kendall's question, when we're talking about legislative reform, in virtually every situation that I know of, women were not given the papers they signed.
Wow.
And this is a tremendous opportunity for legislative action. And it may be that your state doesn't think it's ready to do full access to original birth certificates yet, but what a great way to get your foot in the door as an advocate and let legislators know that these were contracts that signed, and they were not given a copy of them. And we need to change those laws too. And we were so thankful that happened in Colorado in 2014 and 2015. And agencies still struggle with it, and people will call me and reach out, and I say, well, here's the section of the law you cite. And it's a big deal. So I just wanted to add that on.
Yeah, good. That's a very good point. And I don't think I interviewed one woman who actually got a copy of anything. They described it. They said, I walked out of the hospital with stretch marks and nothing in my hand. No, I didn't even get a receipt, right? I mean, just nothing. They didn't get copies of paperwork. I also interviewed women who were asked to sign blank documents where it didn't fill in all the information, leaving it to, in this case, a priest to fill it in. You know, so these were, you know, this should definitely be changed. I don't know how many of those, how much of that paperwork still exists, where it would be filed, and whether some of that, you know, went by the wayside when some of these agencies closed, if they held that, you know, information there. I don't know. But the hospitals, I really don't even know where that information is and whether it can be accessed, but certainly women should have the right to have a copy of what they signed.
Yeah, and you have to be prepared to write into the law that adoption agencies have no liability when they release these records for whatever's on them or whatever they did to people. That's the trade-off, because they know what they did to people and they don't want to be sued.
Yeah. Good point.
Okay, thank you, Rich. Well, it's getting to be that time. We're running over just a little bit. So, and I want to, again, thank you for coming on this evening. We really have appreciated you sharing your story, and we appreciate all the work that you do out there for all of us. Want to remind everybody, if you would like to purchase her book, again, that is The Girls That Went Away, and that can still be purchased on Amazon, correct? And the documentary is A Girl Like Her. So I believe Jennifer's already shared those links in the chat room for all of you that are on the call this evening. And with that, I would like to turn it over to Pam for closing comments. And if you'll stay on just after we end for a few minutes, we'd appreciate that. We'll have Pam go ahead and do closing comments and talk about next week's guest.
Okay, guys, it's that time again. Well, thanks, Anne, for coming on. I mean, we've known each other. I don't even know if we figured out how long it's been, but it's been a long time. I don't have any gray hair. I mean, you know, but that's thanks to L'Oreal. Neither one of us do, but thanks everybody for coming on. And I know all of us, what I love about, I think, all of us is that we're huge on advocacy, you know, not only supporting each other, but going out and supporting everyone else too. And I think that's the great thing about each one of us, you know, from knowing very little to, well, thinking we know a lot, but going out and doing that, because that's what we're about. And I think that's what is the glue that holds all of us together, and coming here every Friday night. And I think that's what makes us special. And I'm glad we have a lot of new people this Friday night. I think that's a great thing too. And next Friday night, it is, does Jen have the thing? It's Kevin Hoffman, is that right?
There he is.
Yep, there he is. And he has a great story. So if you guys will join us next Friday night, and you guys can hear his story. It's pretty amazing. And it'll be nice to hear from another male adoptee. I think that's always great too. And thanks again for joining us. It really does mean a lot to us. I know I say that, but I do truly mean that. We all mean that from the bottom of our hearts. And thank you very much for being here with us.
It was my pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And to all of you guys, thank you very much for joining us. And I hope you enjoyed it. And travel safe back home. I always love saying that.